I am Josh Krinsman, Chair of the Committee, Ward 4 Councilor at Large. At the start of the meeting, we're joined by Councilor John Oliver, Councilor Alan Lobovitz, Councilor Julie Maliki, and online, Councilor Stephen Farrell, who are all members of the committee. We also have with us the Superintendent, Anna Nolan, the Assistant Superintendent, Liam Hurley, Chair of the School Committee, Chris Bresky. And online, I see Andrew Lee from the Mayor's Legal Office, and Jennifer Steele, which is a nice transition into our first item, which is item 435-24. Apologize, let me just go back for 1 second and mention that we are being audio and video recorded. First item, item 435-24. This is Hancock Estates easement for walking trail access. And if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Steele, you are going to tell us what this is and why we should love it?
Sure. I do have some slides. Would you like me to share my screen?
Please. And you should be able to, right? Yep. We are seeing that. Go right
Super.
ahead.
Yeah, so just a few slides. I believe you all are familiar with this from your packets, but what we're speaking about this evening is an additional easement to allow public access into the Kessler Conservation Area. And if you can see the screen here, see my cursor on the screen, we have a number of parcels of city land that are currently under the care and custody of the Conservation Commission. One parcel which is under private ownership, currently the Chestnut Hill Realty Association, that also has public access secured through an easement. But a small gap here at the southern end for what would be a complete trail alignment. And if I can figure out how to advance my slides, this little gap here, identified by the bright blue line and the arrow, is the topic of the additional easement that we're talking about this evening, securing with the cooperation of Chestnut Hill Realty. So currently, the public access easement would force any trail alignment coming in off of LaGrange Street to be on the very steep embankment of the brook corridor itself. And so what we are hoping to secure through your approval this evening is a small sliver of additional easement that would allow for a level footbed. So zooming in, this is the additional easement area that we're looking at to provide a 20-foot additional frontage on LaGrange Street and a slightly broader swath of land to get would-be pedestrians back to where the land levels out just inside of the existing conservation restriction area with public access. So this is the area shown on the topographic map, and you can see very close lines, brown lines here indicating very steep topography here. But in the new easement area, a much more level footbed would be provided for, allowing a trail to come in along this particular alignment here and into the existing easement beyond where there's really very level topography already. So just a few photographs. This is the culvert, the head wall, the culvert of the stream, and the access point that we're looking for is just beyond the edge of the stream, shown here with the blue arrow. Coming in more or less between these two bollards here, it would come right into the woods at this location. And stepping back across LaGrange Street, it would just be this frontage here that would be secured through the easement, and then the roughly 80 or 90 feet in to allow the final connection. And I believe, yep, that's the last slide. So I will stop my share and answer any questions that there might be.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. I'm looking around to see if I have any questions from any of my committee members. Councilor Lobovitz. Please.
So as sort of a new member, relatively new member to all of this, I was just wondering why we wouldn't approve this. I just don't see any reason why we wouldn't, but I'd be curious if there's any comment on that or any concerns, because this is the first, I think, kind of easement that I've voted on or needed to vote on. So
So, Ms. Steele, I
comments
think
on that.
what Council Lobovitz is asking is there any opposition to the city taking this easement?
None that I'm aware of. I actually consider the easement as originally drawn to just sort of have been as the equivalent of a Scrivener's error. It was always intended through the board order and the easement that this would provide public access, and currently there just isn't safe public access. It was just I think drawn in originally in error, and this is really just a correction for that. So I don't see any reason to have any concerns about accepting this easement.
Okay, Mr. Lee, I saw you nodding your head. Is that because that's your belief as well, exactly as Ms. Steele has described it, and you're apologizing for the Scrivener's error that was clearly you?
It happened well before I joined the city, but sure, I'll take responsibility.
That's what I like,
I'm not
accountability.
sure if it's necessarily a Scrivener's error, but I don't think, it was fully thought out how the access would be gained. We worked with the folks over at Hancock Estates that have agreed that it would be beneficial. They're not charging any money for the city. It's going to be nominal consideration. The only things the city would be responsible for is the cost for constructing the path, but it's something that we would do anyways because, again, we're doing it for the public.
And I presume any upkeep or maintenance, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Lee, I hope you know I was only kidding. Councilor Maliki, followed by Farrell. Councilor Maliki.
Thanks. If you could show the map again, I was just curious why the area in question didn't seem to connect up to the longer, wider area.
Ms. Steele, are you able to share your screen again and show the area?
Let's see. If I can get my. It connects back here. So this would.
We're not seeing anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. If I actually click on share, let's try that.
We are seeing your beautiful screensaver or background.
Okay, let me try one more time then.
Wallpaper,
Share.
that's what it's called, right? Wallpaper? Anyone?
Wallpaper.
Screen two.
Wallpaper?
Share.
Yes, we're seeing that now. Thank you.
Okay, all right, terrific. Right, so Councilor Maliki, the existing edge of the easement is where the black cross hatchings end here. And so this is where the easement ends, and the problem is right at this corner here, where the current easement is essentially concurrent with the top of the bank of the stream, or the edge of the head wall. And so what we're looking at is an additional 20 feet of frontage along LaGrange Street, and because it's a slightly tapered easement area, just for ease of future monitoring, we decided to make it 20 feet for easy measuring here, and to come out to this iron pin that was set when the original easement was staked in the field by our surveyors. So this area is the addition, and this is the original edge of the easement, and then this sort of shoots off into the woods.
Oh, I see now. I was looking at that other easement, which I guess is the sewer easement.
Right. There is a sewer and drain easement.
Okay, so never mind. That's fine. Great, thanks.
Right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilor Farrell? Councilor Farrell, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Steele. What are people currently doing? Are they just tromping through the wooded area there?
Well, currently there is not a trail for them to tromp on, more or less. It's clear that some people have been using this, the proposed alignment, and if I go back, you can see the whole the whole alignment here. It's there because this is a very, very, very steep slope, and then wetland down along the stream corridor. There's a fairly narrow band of readily walkable land, and so people have been traversing along the base of this slope. I'm assuming a combination of residents in the Chestnut Hill Realty apartments and the folks in the neighborhood nearby. But this access has not been used because it, until recently, was very overgrown and tangled and very unsafe. So I think most people are finding their way in through other avenues. But certainly when the trail is actually constructed, it will hopefully get a lot of views.
Where, if people were to begin the trek at LaGrange, where would they be parking if they came by car?
Well, they could park along Broadlawn. There certainly is adequate width for street parking there. LaGrange itself could not accommodate parking. It's a fairly high-speed road. And then we certainly anticipate that the Chestnut Hill Realty residents would be regular users of this resource as well.
Right.
And they obviously have their own parking associated with
And I
it.
agree with you, LaGrange is a very relatively high speed and congested street. Is there going to be any way if people were to park on Broadland to give them cross walk there, or any sort of
I
precautions
would need
to help
to
them?
be correct. Is there a crosswalk currently associated with the entry drive to the Hancock Estates? Does
Anyone? We'll have to ask Google later.
yeah.
I just checked Google, there is.
Yeah, so I believe that just up here, if you can see my cursor, there is a crosswalk,
Yep.
and Chestnut Hill Realty has cleared the street frontage on their side of LaGrange, so it's a nice grassy, easy, broad street side verge that accommodates foot traffic.
So people would park on Broadlawn, walk up to the crossing that you indicated, and then walk back down
Or
to
cross
the path?
LaGrange carefully.
Right. So at LaGrange carefully, which is the part that I think most people would do,
Yeah.
will there be any sort of, can we do any sort of cross marking to alert traffic that there may be pedestrians there and that sort of thing?
That is, it's a great question, and it's one that would have to be taken up with those who decide about signage and have the ability to install them appropriately. So,
Well, I know this area pretty well, and I think it would be very helpful and important to have every safety precaution possible. I know that they cost money, but if people are parking on Broadlawn and then crossing LaGrange, that is a dangerous street. And I would just say that that's of concern to me.
you raise a very good point.
So I don't know how you move forward with that, but that's, as I say, it's a concern.
Yeah.
I would not favor this really unless there's some conversation that you will carry on with whomever.
Yeah, well, I believe.
Councilor Farrell, I would suggest that's the type of thing we could speak, or someone could speak to, maybe Ned Cobb about, or, another department, obviously, maybe DPW.
Yeah, the Isaac Prisant is
Or Isaac, sure.
It was is the would be the one that I would first reach out to, as I believe he's aware of the street sign regulations and the requirements that we would have to meet in order to have them installed.
Well, I will happily reach out to him and ask if you would compliment my efforts by doing so yourself.
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
Fine. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Farrell. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you. Hearing no objection, seeing no cause for concern here, I am happy to move approval.
Councilor Oliver has moved approval. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's 5-0. That is approved. Thank you very much, Ms. Steele.
Thank you.
The next item before us is item 345-24. This is a request for updates from the school committee in Newton Public Schools. As folks probably recall, member of this committee and esteemed member of this committee, Councilor Oliver, led the Community Dialogue Working Group, or the CDWG, which just rolls off the tongue. And one of the findings of that working group after the events of last year, shall we say, and the teacher strike and the friction that was caused throughout the community, we worked to try and find a number of ways, a number of things that we could do moving forward. And one of the things, the recommendations that came out of that was to try and develop some more collaboration both between the Programs and Services Committee, or the City Council through the Programs and Services Committee, with the school committee and the work that is ongoing in the schools and the school department. And so we have invited the school committee and members of the school department here to give us a little update on things that are going on and give us an opportunity to dialogue, shall we say. So with that, let me turn things over to our superintendent, Dr. Anna Nolan, and we'll hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much. My name is Anna Nolan. I'm the school superintendent, and I'm joined with by my colleague Liam Hurley, our CFO, and our school committee chair, Chris Bresky. Just wanted to kick off the evening briefly to let the community know that this past week we completed our profile of a learner, portrait of a learner process with 100 community members participating over 2 days. Business leaders, community members, city leaders, governance team, educators, students, and our leadership team to address what we thought are the most critical skills to guide our students and their learning over the next phase of the Newton schools. We will be putting some meat on the bones, if you will, of these areas of critical thinking, communication, empathy, adaptability, and learner's mindset to infuse them into the curriculum as in addition to the academic content that we are responsible for every day. So we look forward to continuing to update you on this process, and would like to thank the City Council team that did attend, and many did attend, and I really appreciate that support. Listed here are just a few resources for our governance team to understand. The school committee has set draft budget guidelines, which were shared at our last school committee meeting and which we intend to have voted at our next November 18th meeting. Our current goals that guide the school system are listed here, but please know that upon the completion of the profile of graduate competencies, we will work again with a cross-community team to create a new 3 to 5 year strategic plan for the district. As we have many new administrators at the central office level, including an assistant superintendent for teaching and learning who is new, for secondary schools who is new, and a director of communications and family engagement. In addition to my own entry plan last year, we have been interviewing hundreds of individuals and families and students and staff members across the system and hearing what they hope for our young people in this next phase of the Newton schools. And to that end, we've developed a new logo and a new statement about our intentions for our students called the Newton Public Schools Promise. It's listed here, where we hope to grow hearts, minds, and bonds for students to independently and safely navigate the world, and in doing so, change it for the better. I list here for your future enjoyment and for the community's enjoyment the kind of expectations that Newton parents have for our school system as part of the promise of what today's education means. A strong and challenging and engaging academic program of studies, inclusive and welcoming schools and small school communities, including particular supports for English language learners. We have well over 50 languages supported and an influx of newcomer English speakers arriving each week in the Newton Public Schools. And we have one of the best premier sets of special education programming that serves the needs of diverse learners within our system and means that we do not have to send our students to outplacement locations to receive their education. Many of the City Council partners joined me on field trips to visit the schools last year and witnessed some of these programs firsthand. Our families expect as well that we will be able to provide robust and meaningful mental health supports. This past year, we added school social workers to every school in the system, and a current working group with our Teachers Association looks to say to the community, are we providing enough social and emotional learning programs, partnerships with community mental health organizations, and supports within the school system to address the rising tide of mental health challenges that continue to assert themselves on our students. And finally, our schools and families expect that we have modern, innovative, and accessible technology available to students so that we can prepare them for the next generation of college and work life, which is extremely tech and digital connected. Challenges which will not be surprising to our city council members still plague us. We have very old and outdated buildings, with a nod, of course, to Mayor Fuller and her team in the building department for continuing to push to update and innovate with the buildings that we have. We have several building projects ongoing right now, but many of our buildings still do not meet 21st century learning standards, never mind next generation learning standards. The district at this time, unlike many systems in Metro West and the Commonwealth, lack early college and early certification programs that are available across the rest of the Commonwealth. As I spoke of before, we do experience and detect growing mental health needs in our students, and we have a curriculum that has not been updated in some time. Depending on the subject area, up to 2 decades time period has passed since a formal review of curriculum. With the exception, of course, of elementary mathematics, which several years ago had a new deployment of mathematics materials, and last year's evaluation of the literacy and reading curriculum and adoption of a new science-based reading curriculum for K-5 students. As I toured last year with city councilors, I was often asked the question, sort of, what is different about schools today? And so I share with the community and with our government partners the conversations that we had just documented here. There has just been a deep increase in state mandates in the last 30 years. I'll just give one example. I had a very funny conversation with a city partner who said, you know, I keep reading about these athletic trainers that you have to have on staff. That seems like a really boutique thing. Is that like really necessary for students? Well, it's not an athletic trainer like if you roll up at Lifetime Athletics for a workout. This is actually Mass Interscholastic Association, Athletic Association requirement that at games, an certified athletic trainer be on site to treat students who may need that, that expectation. Similarly, there are mandates about curriculum frameworks for all subjects. We must employ a district physician and have that person on site. Changes also include that we can no longer expel students or suspend them from school. We must provide in-house or online services for students who may have behavioral needs. Well, just new today, students no longer have to pass the MCAS to graduate, but they still have to take that assessment no matter what happened in the ballot initiative yesterday. So we do have to assist our disabled and English language learner students in mastering the content of that assessment. All staff now must have what is called a sheltered English immersion designation in order to teach students for whom English is not their first language. And the state and federal government have required legal and cybersecurity trainings and requirements for all schools and all individuals. And of course, there's just increased complexity in terms of both the needs of students and also how we serve them. So 30 years ago, when I was a new teacher, we did not have board-certified behavior analysts on staff to address student behavior plans, nor did we have behavior technicians or assistive technology. Technology was not used in the schools to the degree that it is now. We certainly didn't have district technology directors or instructional technology staff, and we were not thinking about cybersecurity and AI protection. So lots changed in the last 30 years, and we are seeking to make the kinds of investments in the system that allow Newton to be on pace with other school districts. I would say that there's also a parental set of expectations that have changed in 30 years for what schools do. Public schools are truly a community hub, and the expectations for them are high for us to provide services from early morning to late into the evening. And there's also a 24-hour on-demand expectation from families that we are communicating with them through email and updates, full curricular and lesson transparency on demand, and for athletics and administrators, coaches and administrators to be getting back with a 24-hour response time to families. There is an expectation that the school will provide a full breadth of after-school programming and athletics to all schools. extra weeks of summer special education programming, and multilingual learner options, both for those for whom English is not a first language, but also for those who want to travel internationally and want to master a second language, even if their first language is English. So with that comes the expectation that we will provide global travel at a reasonable cost and field trips without financial restrictions. In the city of Newton, just like every other expectation in the nation, when a special education evaluation is requested, that must be done within a certain number of days, within 30 to be exact, within the system. However, in Newton, a neuropsychologist level of evaluations is presented in basic special education testing, and that means additional levels of, say, speech and language assessments and psychological and psychiatric evaluations are given as the base amount of assessment that is conducted. Parents expect individualized college counseling. Our teachers, on average, in the content area, write over 50 college recommendations a year. They're expected to run field trips at each level and to allow arts experience to be woven into the school day. We also provide medical care on site for diabetics, those with catheters and particular therapies and allergies, and medication administration happens on site through the nurse's office at every school. We also do provide safeguards from the trauma of geopolitical events and therapeutic on-demand supports within the school. These are certainly changes that have become more complex over the last 30 years. A question that I was often asked by city partners and by community members is about our enrollment. So enrollment is down, shouldn't our expenses be? And so I just want to continue to assert that the complexity and severity of both mental health and academic recovery need is extended in the Newton schools and is exacerbated by a lack of common and systematic emotional and academic curriculum services across all schools. That's not to say these services do not exist, but we need to provide a very consistent district-wide set of supports, which the school committee and the mayor's office has been working with us in order to provide that. Prior budget cuts have indeed created key holes and gaps in our ability to provide this consistency and the strongest educational program possible. And I have listed in small bullets here some of the challenges that have forced some of those cuts. For example, statewide, special education needs have certainly outpaced the state and federal funding formula, and promised reimbursements from previous years for programs and transportation have not been realized. For example, under the Student Opportunities Act, which came about a few years ago, we were promised and expected 75% reimbursement on those transportation and special education costs, but indeed in FY24 have only received 44% from the state. That type of degradation of the expected funding sources certainly has had an impact on Newton that is not necessarily eligible for the same amount of grants and safeguards from the state that other poorer districts are. We have, however, redeployed general education resources to create in-house programming for special education supports, and the effect of that is that we have only 100 students in our district that are outplaced. That is a minuscule number for the size that Newton is, and that is because of the quality and potential of our in-house special education programs. And while overall enrollment in Newton has decreased, special ed enrollment has risen. We are trying to be good, responsible partners in the city ecosystem of finances. And in FY24, the district saved an expected $3 million that was necessary for us to balance this year's budget, so taking $3 million from last year's budget and carrying it forward. We have also realized at this time a $1.6 million additional set of savings in personnel and a $1 million additional set of savings in various operations accounts. And how we did this was through smart hiring, creation of those in-house special education programs that I mentioned before, which help to guard against outside placements. And this is one of the key measures that strong districts can do, because last year, for example, the OSD, the Office of Operational Services Division, decided just randomly to increase out-of-district placement tuitions by a whopping 14%. And they did that because they wanted to allow those out-of-district placements to be able to attract better staff. And so if you can imagine the gall that districts like us had to pay 14% more in order to allow out-of-district placements to give signing bonuses and huge raises to the people who worked in these out-of-district placements. Newton has by far surpassed any district's capacity to guard against those inflationary pressures, and we were not as impacted by that 14% increase as other districts. We've been cutting down on redundant tools, programs, and materials within the district, implementing checks and balances on purchasing, and removing many HR support contracts and unorganized teaching and learning contracts in order to be concentrated and fiscally lean. I do want to say that in the future, you will continue to hear me bring forward other ideas for revenue and cost reductions, and we will be asking for support for ideas like school choice, fee increases, and other revenue changes. This is not a readable slide for you, but it is here for you to peruse in the future because Liam and I have been working very hard with our committee and our leadership team to find ways year by year to reduce our overall costs. Despite this, given the expectation for use of our Education Stabilization Fund and the promised incremental funding that we receive in our budget each year, we forecast a future budget gap that is outlined here graphically. And we can certainly share any background information about this. And we share it now because we will be sharing it throughout the budget season, which will kick off in the new year. And we just want to be really clear that even if we implemented every single one of these reductions, and some have happened, for example, this week, the school committee voted to reduce the amount of private school busing that it would be providing within the city, which results in a $250,000 savings to the public school budget. That's just one of the many things that we have listed here as potential savings. We would have to do every single one of these cuts and reductions, and we would still be meeting this budget gap within what is projected in the next few years. So we'll be talking about this more in detail in the coming weeks and months, but just as a way of a roundup of what's going on in the schools, we wanted to share that with you. I was hired as your new superintendent to look at all the programs and to audit them across the schools, and we are doing that. And I would put our needs into 3 categories: those that are catch-up priorities, those that allow us to thrive and our students to thrive, and those that are the future expectations for school systems. It is my job to forecast what is coming, and I'm trying to put that out to you. Catch-up right now is pretty much allowing us relying on one-time funds from prior years or from free cash to address things like the purchase of new curriculum materials, the upgrading of buildings, to try to replace technology and those types of things that are not reliant on ongoing funding sources. There's still some programmatic catch-ups, like I said, the early college programming or adequate early intervention staff and systems. So those are the pieces that I will be bringing forward in the future budget season. In order for students to thrive, we are going to have to continue to revise our curriculum programs, reduce student learning gaps, and expand mental health supports. And in the future, I forecast for the community that we do not want to be the last people to implement universal pre-K education in the same way that Newton was very late to the game in kindergarten implementation. We do not want to wait to provide more robust college and career pathways and work experiences built into our high school program, and certification pathways where students can leave us as graduates with computer science repair certifications, fitness certifications, preschool education certifications, web design certifications. We would like to expand our CTE and vocational technical offerings so that students on both sides of the city can experience them. And we need to upgrade the state-of-the-art STEM facilities for our science labs, especially in our middle school program. And I know certainly something we'll talk about a little bit later today, we want sustainability practices such as EV busing and up-to-date heating and cooling options that might eliminate fossil fuels to be something we could actually aspire to affording in future years. And lastly, I just wanted to share with you the major investment that we must make now in an urgent way is the curriculum renewal cycle. And with our new Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Dr. Gina Flanagan, has put together this curriculum review cycle. Wherever you see a year 2 implementation column, right here, is where the actual purchase of curriculum materials for that particular subject will happen. We have staggered it over a 10-year period so that within a 10-year cycle, all curricula in the Newton Public Schools will be articulated to state expectations, revised with our teachers, and have the appropriate assessments and expectations for the rigor level we expect for Newton. So that gets us through 2031. It's a very exciting time for Newton, but it certainly weighs upon us all that we must achieve within the next 10 years. I'm happy to take any questions here, or Liam can go on to busing.
Well, the next item on our agenda is the busing. I intentionally sort of separated them because I thought we could focus on this first and then we'll move on to the buses, if that's okay with you guys. Okay. While folks are thinking about their questions, I'll ask one or two. First of all, thank you. That was a broad, informative, thorough presentation. Really appreciate it. I mean, it's like you spend like all day and night thinking about this stuff. It's like a full-time job to you almost, you know? So
Mr.
very
Chairman?
much appreciate that. Yes, let me acknowledge that we have been joined by Councilor Lyle Baker, who is
I'm
here
also
and
joined
brought
by
pizza.
a fresh pizza that came with me. So if any of you folks want a slice just to tide you over, that's
you,
not
Councilor
normally
Baker.
what I've come, but the event I attended sent me with this for all of you hardworking people.
I don't know if folks at the school department ever have pizza at a meeting, but
No, we're too busy leading the
gotcha.
schools.
Okay, just wanted you to feel at home. Let me also mention that we've been joined, I think, online by Councilor Martha Bixby and Councilor Pam Wright. So welcome, all the councilors. Dr. Nolan, at one point during the presentation, there were two things that sort of struck me. One, obviously, the budget gap. You also, at one point in there, I think there was a bullet about seeking smaller elementary schools. So I want to ask you sort of a two-part question or two separate questions. I don't know however you want to take it, but I want to get your impression about the budget and sort of what's going on, how you feel about it. I know you put a lot of it in there, but you know, if you have thoughts about that, and whether closing elementary schools is a component of that, or whether the move to say smaller elementary schools is more of a direction of keeping all the elementary schools open that we have now, and maybe moving some additional programming into them and reducing the number of students, elementary school students per building. Does that make sense?
It does. So certainly I serve at the will of my committee, so that they have set a direction last spring that we are on a holding pattern for a 5-year period while we work on the upgrading of the academic and social emotional learning program. My job, however, is to make sure that we continue to have enough revenue sources to do our part to contribute to what the city is doing. And so, you know, there is no recommendation I can make of an ideal school size. It just does not exist. So if the school committee directs us to have small schools and to work on that model, we will do that. And if they direct us that they would like a smaller building portfolio, we can do that as well. So currently, we are working under the assumption that for the next 5 years, we need to address any places that have drops in enrollment, and I will be proposing that we do some innovative thinking like school choice, or like perhaps we add preschool classrooms as feeders to the K programs in each school. Many schools do that. It would also allow us to have additional tuition monies and give us a good look early at our new students who would be matriculating to us anyway. So there's plenty of ways to solve the problems before us. I think it's an expectation and part of the fabric of the Newton Public Schools to have these small neighborhood schools. So many parents have shared, you know, just how much it means to have that small network of parents close to their home, and it really means something here in Newton. It's not just a flashy thing. It's. I mean, everyone will recount to you, you know, I was Zervis blank and blank, right? They might have tattoos on themselves saying where they went to elementary school. So it's really important to this community to keep that identity.
I appreciate that example because I went to Zervis Elementary School,
So you know what I'm saying.
but I do not have a tattoo to prove it.
Can I add something to that, Councilor Krinsman?
Sure, Mr. Bresky.
So, Dr. Nolan showed, from a big picture perspective on the budget, Dr. Nolan showed that slide with the gap, and that's the same chart we showed you back in the spring when we were here to discuss how the Education Stabilization Fund has us in this, okay spot where we were able to add a lot of staff this year. We accomplished the things that Dr. Nolan really identified in her entry plan as our top priorities as a system, but that is life-limited money. And we still face that, 2.5 year gap out towards 2029, through 2031, where we have not identified a source of funding to keep us at level services. And just like I said back in the spring, I'll repeat tonight, this has to be all of our top priority from a school perspective, from a school funding perspective, of how do we fill that gap. And it's unique in the sense that it's not perpetual. When we hit that glorious day in September of 2031, when our pension is fully funded and the city has approximately, by its own estimates, $25 million of incremental funding available, that's enough to get us there. But how do we fill that gap? So that is what is, from a budget perspective, everything we do and making tough decisions. Like Dr. Nolan said, the committee voted to effectively pull back the busing service we provide to private school students, which was very, very unpopular amongst the 150 students and their families who utilize that busing service and no longer will be able to. But we have no choice other than make those kind of hard decisions. We had a presentation at our last meeting about Newton Community Education, which falls under the school department and has a $250,000 hole after running at a, $1.3 million deficit over the last 3 years, I believe, cumulatively. That's not sustainable. We can't fund that and still provide the core academic services and be able to address that issue. So just
I know there's an item coming up later on our agenda that's also designed to help with the problem you've identified. Not solve it, but help.
Right. So, depositing a couple $1 million into the Educational Stabilization Fund, that is the type of thing that's going to have to continue over the next couple years if we're going to solve this problem. This is not something we can solve ourselves. To Dr. Nolan's point, it's people look at, closing schools. If we were to close or consolidate schools, it just doesn't do it. There's no way we can save ourselves, just to save money, cost our way out of this. It's just not possible.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Councilor Oliver?
Thank you, sir. Again, I'll just echo, thank you so much for bringing this forward, not only tonight, but hopefully on into the future as well, as we continue to partner together to make sure that we're supporting our school system in the best way possible. And I did have a question. A few folks have actually prompted me over the past couple of days to go back and watch the school committee meeting from Monday night. I was hoping to get just a quick recap of perhaps both of your takes, Mr. Bresky and Dr. Nolan, like in terms of like specific to NCE, because I'm fairly familiar with NCE. I used to serve on the board at NCE, and I'm just hearing a lot of different kind of sound bites, and I'm just curious if you could take a minute and maybe give us your thoughts on that, please.
Sure. So I'll share my thoughts. First, as I said, I believe it's run at a cumulative $1.3 million operating deficit for the last 3 years. Currently, it was running based off of reserves. Yep. Currently is in a deficit. That is a deficit that the city has made clear they will not fund and can only really continue operations if funded by NPS. And by Mr. Hurley's estimates, that's like $500,000 just to get through the winter programs. That's money we don't have. There was a lot of discussion on, it struck me as the director pointed out, some of the cost issues, namely the the fact that there was never pension funding, or the pension funding for those employees who work for NCE, that was never either allocated to NCE in the past, or just, I mean, given it wasn't really funded throughout the city for a long time, there was nothing to allocate. And that is now $150,000 a year. So there's some very big ticket items like that that have driven part of this deficit. But as I look at it, the bigger piece to me was the revenue side. NCE, before the pandemic, was pulling in consistently about $2.6, $2.7 million a year in revenue. Even now, 4 years removed from the pandemic, they're running at like, I think it was 65% of that or so. So the demand for those services just have not come back. And I don't know if that's there's too many other competing programs, or exactly what caused that. But clearly there has been a shift in, let's call it consumer preference of who, what programs are being offered and the take-up rate on them. So I don't know what the fix to that is.
Fair. Okay.
I have a similar take on that. My primary mission, of course, is to make Newton Public Schools academic and social emotional learning program our core mission, run the best that it can. So I cannot take $500,000 for an after-school and evening enrichment community program and feel like I'm doing that. That said, it's a very storied program here. It's meant a lot to the community. It's really difficult. There's a lot of overlap between what Parks and Rec provides and other services within the community, which did rise up during the pandemic because public entities were closed, private ones emerged. So it's no fault of anyone at NCE that these are the market conditions. Other cities and towns have been plagued by that. In many cities and towns, though, the recreation department actually runs these programs for the city. So this seems to be sort of, we're competing with ourselves in a way with the program. Although I did speak with a mother today who said, the programs are so different, and they do offer very differently adult ESL courses, which no one's competing with that market. So, we do have to consider, who will provide those services. But she was saying the real issue for working parents is that you pay a fee for after-school care and before-school care, and then you pay a fee on top of that in order to use an NCE after-school program. And the expense is just too great. Now, many other districts deal with this by going out to bid for these companies that provide a package that is before school and after school inclusive of enrichment, and they usually guarantee a certain profit. So those types of organizations are competing with NCE as well. So it's just a different time, and I think, at a minimum, we have to sort of look at it and understand, is this still something that is a viable program financially in our community?
Thank you. And just as a quick follow-up, is there, it was pretty apparent a while ago that there was competition, right, inside of Newton with Parks and Rec programs and NCE and JCC or JCE as well. There were multiple different programs that the city was not funding by any means, but they were all going on in Newton. And I'm just wondering, is someone trying to take a look at kind of teasing those apart to say, well, here are the different spaces that the different entities are perhaps better suited to compete in, not within Newton, but outside of Newton, to be able to draw kids and adults, even in some cases, into Newton. Do we know if that's happening anywhere?
I don't, and honestly, I can't. It's just not something that the school system could take on as a research piece.
Yeah, and I'm not recommending that that would be an NPS responsibility. I'm just curious if someone is tackling that.
Someone wrote to us today actually asking that same question, who I think was a private business. I think they were looking for a business opportunity.
Yeah, well, fair enough, right. All right, well, thank you very much. I might have some additional questions in a minute.
Thank you. Councilor Malky?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the change to the busing for private schools, and I did get a letter from that. I don't know if other people did too. Can you explain what, sort of what's legally required, what we've been doing, what we'd be doing now? Is that now at the minimum of what is required, or are we still doing more than the state requires?
Yeah, so what we're providing right now is beyond what the state requires. So it's a little confusing because the law has actually changed a little bit over the last 30 years from the original statute to a couple SJC cases created new case law that have determined there was a period where, in the 1980s, where the requirement became far greater. The threshold of when you had to provide that busing became far greater. And then the court ruled that that's only effective to the extent the state's funding it, which it has not done in decades. And therefore, the law reverts back to what it was before. That says effectively you have to provide to private school students the same rights and privileges you provide to public school students. But you have to provide busing for a private school student only to the extent that their private school is closer than what would be their assigned public school. That eliminates the vast majority of private school students that we are busing today, currently about 150. Most of which are going to two schools, Mount Alvernia Academy and the Solomon Schechter School. So along with that 150, there are 350 NPS students who do not attend their assigned school, but attend another school within NPS. Some of that is, folks who have moved from one part of town to the other, and the kids want to stay at the school they were at. Some are, two-family households. Some are, folks whose, might be convenient for a parent to drop a kid off at near their place of work or something like that. I'm sure there's instances of, bullying, discomfort, things like that have probably driven some of that as well. To use an example, if you're a student who lives in the Memorial Spalding district and you choose not to go to Memorial Spalding, but to go to Fessenden, we will provide you a bus and we will do it at no cost. If you are that same student in the Memorial Spalding district and you choose not to go to a Memorial Spalding, but you choose to go to Franklin School around the corner from Fessenden, we will not provide you the option of a bus at any cost. And so that didn't sit well with a lot of members of the committee, that we are literally providing a service to private school students that is not even available to public school students. And there was just no way to solve that problem because those 350 NPS students crisscross the city in every which direction, and our transportation director estimated that could cost up to $1 million to provide busing for those services to match private school. So, given we are still in this mode of trying to turn over every rock to find every bit of savings we can, as I tell Liam all the time, every $100,000, every $200,000 we save is money that's not coming out of the Education Stabilization Fund and money that's going to be available to help start filling that hole. So the decision was made by the committee to pull back that service to meet the state requirement and no longer exceed it.
What is the state requirement now exactly? What you said,
So
only to the extent that it's not a lot late.
Yeah, so the state requirement for busing as a minimum threshold is K-6 if you live more than 2 miles from your school. So if we were to completely pull back on our transportation services to truly meet the state minimum, where we said we will only bus students who are K-6 and more than 2 miles from their school, we would run... Yeah, we'd have a handful of buses instead of mid-30s, and we would save almost $3 million a year. That would be, yeah, but that would be no high school busing, no elementary busing if you live within 2-mile threshold. And so what we have to do for private students is basically what we have to do for public students. But that is limited to the distance of your private school from home relative to the distance of your, what would be assigned public school from home. So that's sort of the threshold.
So we've scaled that back to the state minimum.
We've scaled that back to providing the same rights and privileges under state law.
And when does that take effect? Is that next academic year?
It's going to take effect in the fall of 2025. There was some discussion about this. Myself and Mayor Fuller were both of the opinion that we should start implementing this in September of 2026, that this is it's a big change, it's a big impact. The majority of the committee did not agree and felt that we should start implementing in fall of 2025.
Councilor Labovitz?
Thanks again for excellent presentation. I think I asked this when you presented initially. What are the measures of success that you're going to be using in terms of all the goals you've articulated? And how will that assessment proceed? Is it over every year? Is it 2 years from now? Is it how if you could be more specific about that? Thank you.
So this year is the last year of a set of bridge goals before we wrote a longer-term strategic plan. So if you go onto our website, or I can send it to you, we actually have, for our 4 main goal areas, which I shared with you here, there are a set of success measures for each goal. So literally, what are the products that will tell us whether this was done or not done? You can look at last year's goals, and you can look at my evaluation to see that same information from the prior year. Moving forward, we will employ similar metrics depending on what phase of implementation one of the goals is in. Some might be product measures, some might be success measures. So for example, moving students from underachieving in a particular subject area to on grade level or beyond. And some are things like program creation or reflection on current programs. So it sort of depends what it is, but our district goals currently have success measures that you could review.
So can we get a copy of
Sure.
those, please?
Yep.
Thank you. That was it.
You're all set, Councilor Labovitz? Okay. I have one additional question, if I could. Yesterday was, for many of us, Election Day. If I'm not mistaken, for NPS, it was a professional development day, appropriately and intentionally designed to be a day when the children are out of the schools and voting is happening in many of the schools. I believe that's the case. If that is the case, can I ask, how'd that go?
It was a really wonderful day. The first ever full day of professional development for all 2,100 of our educators within the Newton system. We were at Newton South High School. And we had over 275 individual workshops with internal and external presenters. This is one picture of the math curriculum audit happening. Oh, sorry, you're not seeing it. One moment. So this is a picture of our K-12 mathematics team and principals who spent the day looking at maps of what we are currently teaching in mathematics and what we hope to teach in mathematics in the future, developing those common assessments and ideas for the future. This was just one of the 275 sessions that occurred. And so far, the feedback on the day is overwhelmingly positive, and it was a real boost for the system.
Fantastic. Is it something you think would be either annual? There are elections every year, at least unless and until we switch our municipal elections to be concurrent with state elections, or something you might do every other year? What is the sort of current thinking on that?
So the hope is that that's what we negotiated with our teachers union, that this is a yearly event. And if you recall, this took 2 additional days off of the school year that was included in the Newton contract for many years and were underutilized in the past. So just a really great day of learning and togetherness, and we hope to do it each year.
Great. Thank you. Oh, is there a new contract? Sorry.
You hadn't heard?
I thought there was some.
Still too soon.
That's my middle name.
This committee has a lot of humor.
I see that our city CFO, Ms. Lemieux, has her hand up online. Ms. Lemieux, did you want to add something at this point, or ask a question, or just comment on my witty banter?
Actually, you are, as always, quite witty, Mr. Chairman. I just did want to make one comment. I want to certainly begin by thanking our superintendent for and her team for this great presentation. I certainly understand how much work has gone into this. The only comment I would like to make is there was a slide that its title was "Enrollment is Down, Shouldn't Expenses Be?" For anyone who may be watching this program tonight and may not really understand that there's a box on that slide that says that prior budget cuts have created key holes and gaps. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that the school department budget, certainly in the past 15 years, has never been cut. In fact, since Mayor Fuller has been mayor, so since the 2018 budget, which is the last one that was prepared by Mayor Warren, in the past 7 years, we have increased the school department budget by $59 million, and that's not including the $4 million of the stabilization fund that we utilized this year. That's an average annual increase of 3.85% per year for the school department budget. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. Now, I certainly recognize that over the years there have been expenditures that may have either increased by more than 3.85% for Newton Public Schools or additional services that they have wanted to provide. That's where the rub has been with, do they need to adjust other services so that they can include newer costs? But I just want to make sure that I'm on record and that anyone who may be watching this understands that the school department budget has not been cut at all, and in fact has increased by an average of 3.85% per year over the last 7 years.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So we
Thank you.
think of this as the long shot and Goodfellas entering the club. No cuts. Dr. Nolan?
Well, I guess it depends how you define cuts, because in the 2 years prior to my arrival, there was a significant reduction in personnel, upwards of 45 individual positions. And we can say that the budget has increased 3.5%, and indeed it has, but expenses have consistently outpaced that. And as I mentioned to you in the presentation, special education reimbursements have not kept pace with the promised amounts. So that constitutes a cut. So when the budget does not keep pace with the expenses, that means there are cuts that are made. So understanding no ill intention from anyone, and certainly our city governance team is caught in the same difficult circumstances that we are. But in order to address just our contractual obligations each year, it is a 4.2% increase. So a 3.5% increase constitutes cuts.
Understood. Thank you, Dr. Nolan. Appreciate the clarification as well. Councillor Oliver is making a motion to hold the item, I believe.
I am. I would love to not only hold this item, but make sure that we are holding it open so that we can have this conversation on an ongoing basis throughout the term and into the next calendar year. But thank you again, everyone, for all the hard work, the information you're bringing forward, and you know, at least from my perspective, keeping us all apprised of how things are going at NPS. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Oliver has moved hold. Any other discussion on that motion? I will just add my gratitude as well. Very much appreciate the discussion. Look forward to continuing it as the case may be, as needed, and as we all choose to continue this discussion, because I think it's something that's very incredibly important to the city. All those in favor of hold, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Thank you. The next item is item 297-24. This is requesting discussion on the current status of transitioning to electric school buses. And if I am not mistaken, the assistant superintendent, who is also maybe the chief financial and administrative officer, Mr. Liam Hurley, is going to talk to us. I think it's off.
Good evening, everyone. Liam Hurley here, Assistant Superintendent, Chief Financial Officer. Thank you for having us tonight. So I've got a slide presentation as part of this slide deck on the electric bus, just giving an update about some of the opportunities and really kind of number of really challenges which are part of what we've been looking at. We've been thinking and talking about electric buses actually for a number of years internally. I'm joined in the audience. Stephanie Gilman has been a partner with me in looking at this and talking through and thinking about ideas. So just in terms of getting a baseline on kind of where we are with our current contract and our current bus fleet, which does not have any electric buses, we have diesel buses. We are in year 3 of a 5-year contract with Eastern Bus Company that expires at the end of June 2027. Eastern Bus leases directly to depot spaces, one right behind the Whole Foods, and run on Webster Street. They have a total of 42 buses. Approximately 31 are in-city, 5 are METCO, and 6 are shared METCO buses. So METCO actually has more than 5, but we actually then take those METCO buses and then redeploy them in our tiered system that we have, as well as 5 backup buses and drivers as well. Give some more details here. I won't read all of these pieces, but we obviously have a comprehensive program, a 3-tiered system for our morning and afternoon routes. We also provide late buses to our middle and high schools. We have the almost 3,700 students riding our buses, and this is not including approximately a little more than 400 students that ride our vans for students on IEP, and those are going within the city and actually outside of the city. In FY25, just a current cost for one bus, and this is the all-in cost, includes maintenance, includes the bus, includes fuel, insurance, things like that we pay to Eastern is $120,600 annually. In terms of some of the what we've been doing to date, some of our electric bus gathering information we have, and some of the benefits really of electric bus. I think it's pretty well known, but certainly there's no tailpipe emission coming out of it. And we can talk a lot about the benefits of that. There's reduced greenhouse gases. Certainly there's talk about reduced maintenance costs. They're quiet and they're clean operating. And basically the potential to improve the overall quality environment in Newton is part of that process. There is certainly some bipartisan infrastructure laws that have been acted out there in terms of the school bus program, providing a significant amount of money out there for a number of school districts. And I want to talk about that just in a little bit. So next slide, thank you. So some of the things we've done to date, we have actually applied. We actually had our vendor Eastern Buses applied for 2 buses in the first round of the EPA bus round that was out there. We were not selected, and it's really by no chance. They were really targeting kind of low income, also more rural areas and kind of environmental justice communities. So Newton was not selected in that. We did go through just a little market research a number of years ago with Highland Electric. That's a name that's kind of been around Newton. This is a new company that is really invested in electric school bus transportation and transition. And they talked to us about some of the benefits and how they structure things, which is quite a long term to look at, longer than what we'd be allowed to do without your approval and school committee approval. We have applied to the Mass Clean Energy Center in terms of their consulting services. We've also we've been working basically with the city in terms of our former transportation director, Josh Ostroff, as looking at potential sites, not even outside of Newton, to look at potentially regional locations for where shared buses could be. So we've spent a considerable amount of time thinking and contemplating and kind of trying to adjust our and really get kind of up to speed with where we can go with electric buses. But I want to talk about some of the challenges next, which I think we've experienced here. Did that go? So, yeah, I'm just going to keep on going to this next one. So some of the challenges really regarding this, or regarding electric school bus transition, is that the fact that we do not own our own depots here in Newton. So those are leased. As you can imagine, the infrastructure required to go to electric vehicle charging infrastructure is substantial. They would need significant charging stations to really fully envelop in the ability to charge these buses on a nightly basis. There is some consideration out there of potential mobile devices, but ultimately you'd want to have a very secure situation with having kind of a charging infrastructure that would be ready. Funding, that's certainly going to be a talk, and we've talked obviously a lot about that tonight. The cost of an electric bus is 3 to 4 times the cost of a diesel bus. It's upwards of $300,000 to $400,000. The timing of getting an electric bus is 1 to 2 years as well, just to get that. Navigating the grants and rebates and technical assistance programs out there is challenging and complex. And then the term, I talked about the term of the bus, and what some of these financing companies are offering are typically 10 plus years to afford that $400,000 price tag just for one bus. We've also been in contact with our vendor, Eastern Bus. There's resistance from our vendor. He's been in the business for 40 years and is only used to diesel buses, but very concerned about the battery life, very concerned about the quality in the snow, concerned about what happens when things break down. They do not have mechanics that know how to fix electric buses. So a number of challenges with our current vendor in thinking about adopting 2 electric buses. And then lastly, just really if you think about this, we contract, and as far as I know, we've contracted out our busing to a third-party vendor for all of the services. That includes the bus, that includes the drivers, the maintenance, the fuel, all the employee benefits. The challenge, I think, with thinking about kind of how we would go about kind of the grants and who owns the buses. Does the bus company own the buses, or do we own the buses and then we sublet those buses to a vendor? How do we attract different vendors to actually bid on our contracts? So the model is complex to think about how do we acquire electric buses that can stay within Newton for the long term. So I talked a bit about kind of some of the costs and funding here, some of the federal and state grants that are out there, and really just kind of trying to navigate these grants that are there available. We've put a lot of links in terms of all the pieces that are out there. Stephanie Gilman, again, our Director of Planning and Projects Management and Sustainability, has done a lot of work and has sat through a lot of kind of conferences thinking about this. But I'll just leave you with, again, kind of these little slides here. Next slide, Anna. Really, if we wanted to get serious about electric buses in Newton, I've been talking about this for quite some time, and it really is very, very challenging, is to identify some land or a lot of land. Potentially, it could be 2, ideally would be a 1 place for a bus depot. Our vendor is paying now $34,000 a month for these 2 spaces. With some very simple math, he would turn that, if we were able to provide land for our vendor or potential future vendors, that would be savings in our pocket day one. So they would no longer have to lease that space. This would be something that we would then be able to provide. We then could think about how we could figure out the charging infrastructure that is so complex. You'd need utility companies, you need to make sure there's enough power coming to those sites, and you need to basically design and develop that charging structure that it's in a space that we could take for a long time. We need to consider applying for a future, and there's a current grant that is out there. It's coming up January 9th. The challenge with that, I think I've outlined all the significant challenges with applying for these grants in terms of our vendor, in terms of the complexity of who owns and who manages these buses. And there is still the very real possibility that we won't have a chance to actually, even if we apply, unlikely that we get it. So it's something that we're considering right now. Have not made a decision with that. And then just a few other kind of pieces here as we think forward, moving forward, obviously connecting with Eversource, thinking about how we actually think about the charging infrastructure. And then as we think about our contract coming up in the next 2 years, what language do we want to do? Can we add some language? Wellesley Public Schools put what was called a bid alternate. So in addition to diesel buses, they asked for what would be the cost for electric buses, and they got NA as a response. So no vendors were willing to actually even give them a quote to transition to electric buses. So, the overall sentiment that I have is, I believe we should move to and transition to electric buses at some point in the future. There's not many communities. There are a few communities. I think Beverly is one. There's a few that may have a pilot or two going as well, but it's a real challenge. So that's the overall kind of landscape and kind of the steps that we've taken in the last number of years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hurley. Appreciate that. That was a lot of information and very helpful information. Councillor Oliver?
Certainly, again, thank you. Wow, like a lot of information in there. I'm kind of shocked that we haven't been able to figure this out yet. This seems pretty straightforward. Not so much really at all. I am curious, sorry. That was
Please
my
try to
weak
avoid
attempt at it.
humor.
I was trying to follow in your footsteps. I fell short. My apologies. The humor content fell apart there. But I guess I do wonder, I'm wrestling with the phrasing of the question I want to ask, and I might actually pass on that particular question given the fact that the election was just yesterday. But how many, are we chasing other districts in the state or anywhere in the US in terms of success stories or practices that are out there that, because I think we've had this conversation before in terms of who's doing this well?
So, I've done some research on this. Nationally, there are some communities and some school districts that I think have been successful with getting electric buses. I think they're in different parts of the country. I would say that they've had either a large infusion of money coming either from the grant or from their local awarding authority or from the state, looking at how they could transition that. I'm not aware of really many Massachusetts communities. Beverly, I think, has a few electric buses that they've got. Cambridge had one a number of years ago. They call it the kind of the carnival bus because they just take it out once a year, so they do not even use that bus at this point. So we're really not behind many communities at all. As far as I'm aware of, in Massachusetts, there are a few that I think are getting there. Nationally, I believe that there's a number of cities, and I think Highland is a vendor that has worked with some of these cities. I know also Canada is also, which is a large bus manufacturing sector, has actually had some success, I think, in transitioning to those. But I think in those cases, there's been significant funding, infrastructure, and land for those communities to get that. And those are the areas that we really have not had the success to be able to pull off here.
Great. And then one other thought, like how rapidly is this technology becoming more readily accessible in terms of either cost, charge time, and some of the other challenges that I know you chase with you're faced with EVs?
So I've talked with another vendor that is a recent startup on this, and his comment was that these buses are getting better every year. So I do think the technology is getting better. I think the range for the buses is also another factor. I think that's actually getting longer and better as well. So I do think the technology, like electric cars, every year, every model, they're looking at ways to make these more efficient and better. So I do think that to answer, is the technology changing? I think it is, and it's an area that people are focused on, and obviously a lot of investment is going into it. When's the right time to get in? I'm not sure if that's your question, but certainly the technology and the range and the reliability of these buses, I think, is going to get better and better.
Yeah, because I do think that my point is literally, when would be the right time where we might have the ability to kind of meet this technology where it's at, if I could kind of co-opt that statement. But I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Just to respond to that, what I would say that this idea of the bus depot if we want to meet that challenge, the idea of finding a bus depot and what that will do, and what the challenge that we've experienced here in Newton is, we've not had any other vendor bid on our bus for our bus contract for any length of time. Part of that is that our requirement to either have a depot in Newton or very close proximity to Newton. It's very, very expensive to find these depots. So we've only been able to have our one vendor. So by finding that bus depot, I think that's a collective challenge out there. We'll have the benefit of potentially attracting a vendor to bid on it, either for diesel or electric, get some competition in in our pricing, and then we have that land that we can think about how we can build out for future infrastructure. That's really critical.
No, that's a really interesting point. Sorry, Mr. Chair, just one more question, follow up on that. Have we started, what type of an exercise is it to define what I'm going to just call the needs of one of these depots in terms of space, service, location within the city or outside the city, I guess?
Grid capacity.
Yeah, we have actually done some internal work looking at more than a dozen city-owned land properties, and we would need to kind of look at that closely. And I think the availability of electric current coming into that space. I know that there's some members within the community, and obviously some of the folks on the city side, that I think if this was of interest, that we could look at some of the properties owned by the city and see what's the basically kind of a matrix analysis of kind of pros, cons, and what pieces are already available for that. But it has not really been extensively reviewed, beyond kind of a high level. Here's some sites. What could we park buses there?
Great, thank you, sir. All set.
Councilor Labovitz?
So, Councilor Oliver asked the question I was going to ask, but I'm not sure you answered the question of how much space would be required for the depot or depots.
Thank you. So to approximately park 50 buses, and you need parking space as well for the drivers to arrive and park as well. And again, this is basically a 365-day operation. Buses are parked overnight. We would, from kind of our estimate, we think we need a minimum of about 1.5 to 2 acres of land. If you ever get a chance to just eyeball the space behind Whole Foods in Newtonville, you can see the size of that land. They actually have a trailer as well where their dispatch is. They have several staff in there, so having access to a bathroom, a small office area would be nice. We have our safety training come to the Ed Center for our training, but certainly these staff need a little bit of an indoor space as well. They come in out of the elements, talk to the manager, have that dispatch. So 1.5 to 2 acres would be fantastic if we could find that.
One more question.
Please.
Am I incorrect in recalling that the City Council passed a rule allowing a 12-year contract because of the 10-year requirement, at least that's been stated? And how does that? How do we move forward with that? Is that going to make any difference, the rule that we passed in this conversation?
So, the City Council passed that. I would say that actually, I would want the school committee to weigh in on that and see whether or not they'd want to actually put the chips all in on 12 years with one vendor. If that's into our best advantage, it may very well be, but to me, that would be a school committee, I think, choice and decision. I appreciate it, and I think it's great that we've got that flexibility. So, to me, that's actually a great step. I think, again, going back to the same thing, though, thinking about how can we attract multiple vendors and what's the best way for us to transition to it. So just having the 12 years alone, from my perspective, is not the gateway for us to transition to electric buses. That's going to help us if we want to amortize those costs over a length of time. I think having basically that bus depot, attracting multiple vendors is going to be key. But if that was something that was beneficial to, for all of the school committee was interested, and this would allow us to transition to it, that term does help us spread out the cost of that initial cost for the buses. So that would give us some ability to spread those costs out, because the 5 years those costs would be quite high, I think, to try to amortize the $400,000 one year bus cost into a 5-year contract. So it would have some advantages.
Thank you.
Councillor Farrell, your hand was up for a moment. Is it intentionally down? Has your question been answered?
Thank you, Chair. Over 10 months, I've learned that I should not follow Councilors Oliver and Lobovitz. They've answered my questions. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Lemieux, I see your hand up. Did you want to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, just quickly, I just want to clarify what I believe the council voted on was a resolution during the budget process for us to potentially enter into a 12-year arrangement with an EV bus provider. I just want to make sure everybody knows that that doesn't necessarily change any rules. There have been no actions that have been formally taken, and the only way that we could do that, which I'm not saying that we can't do it at all, we could, but it would be that we would come before you as a council seeking, actually, we would put a docket item before you seeking to enter into a lease term or whatever it may be for up to 12 years. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that that 12 years is not officially in play yet, not that it couldn't be. I think the bigger piece of the conversation are all of the different hurdles that Mr. Hurley just was mentioning that we would need to solve for before we could ever come to you. Asking for a 12-year lease is almost the easiest part of this entire equation, if you will.
Thank you, Ms. Lemieux. And if memory serves, and it usually doesn't because I have a terrible memory, but if memory serves, I think there's a requirement under state law that a contract greater than 3 years, the mayor does need approval, and I believe we authorized the most recent 5-year bus contract through the city council. So that was perhaps that and the resolution were the two things you were thinking of.
You are correct, Mr. Chairman.
Nailed it. Councillor Oliver?
Great, and I just want to point out, and this will seem strange coming from me, resolutions are, as the CFO just pointed out, far from binding, but they are an indication that this council is open to, amenable to, and in support of, clearing at least that hurdle in this process. Even if it is perhaps one of the more minor hurdles, it is a hurdle that this council has certainly said, yeah, we're okay, working with anyone, anyhow, to get that part of it taken care of. Just wanted to make sure that's clear.
Appreciate it. I'm going to ask one question, which I don't think necessarily has an answer, but I just want to throw it out there as a thought, which is, knowing that there are several communities and several folks who are interested in this, who are certainly interested in electric vehicles, who are interested in preserving the planet, and who are interested in bus fleets as one of the fronts on that battle, I'm just curious if there are regional opportunities. I don't know exactly what that would look like, what type of sharing arrangement, who gets what when, but if there are multiple communities, if there is a regional component to a solution, is that something that either you would be open to or might be helpful?
Yes, so I do think that there is, overall interest amongst school districts, business managers, superintendents in thinking about electric buses for the future. I am in touch with a few of the various school business managers locally, Wellesley, Lexington, and Brookline as well. Brookline doesn't have many buses, but they do have a few, and they have the same vendor, Eastern Bus, as well. Some of that is trying to tick and tie when contracts expire. Most of us have times that don't expire at the same time. One of the ones that I was interested in, I think that I mentioned in the discussion, is that for some time with a former kind of director of transportation, Josh Ostrov, we were trying to find a regional location. There was some sites between, I think basically from Waltham down to Needham. Was there a regional location where multiple communities could come together and set up a regional charging infrastructure? So Newton might need 50 buses, Wellesley might need 15, Weston might need 12. Where could 100 buses be parked, charged, all that? If you can imagine, that's just such a challenging thing to try to find land right along the 128 belt. That was something that was looked at. There was some kind of discussions about interchanges, things like that. But as far as I know, nothing has come to that. But that would be, to me, a great way to kind of regionalize the ability to kind of get all that charging infrastructure in these buses so they could service 4, 5, 6 communities nearby.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, perhaps if it were something that we could actually somehow locate in Newton, you might be able to generate some revenue from the surrounding communities to help utilize that. I have a sense that Councilor Oliver is going to move NAN, but I could be wrong about that. Councilor Oliver?
Yeah, I believe this is probably an item we would like to hold as well, correct? For later in the term, is that?
I was going to suggest NAN. It doesn't feel like later in the term we're going to necessarily have action on that, and if we do, we can docket it. But
I'd be amenable to making a motion to NAN the item.
that's a good idea. Councilor Oliver has moved NAN. Any discussion on that motion?
Very controversial.
Sorry?
I just said it's very controversial.
All right, all those in favor of NAN, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. One more school item, two more school items, I apologize. Item 409-24, this is authorization to appropriate $2 million to the NPS Educational Stabilization Fund. And if I am not mistaken, Ms. Lemieux, you're going to tell us why this is an excellent idea?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As many of you may recall, our free cash was certified approximately a month or so ago, and we have $23.6 million worth of free cash that was certified this year. That is about $10 million more than we typically, want to make sure that we have certified each year. Virtually entirely driven by the interest income that we were able to earn during fiscal 24. We had our interest income exceeded our budget by $11.6 million. At this point in time, what we did when we put the forecast together, you may all recall this, we had come up with a plan where we would come to you now in the fall looking to appropriate about $10 million worth of our free cash. We have about $5.4 million that we want to appropriate for the schools and about $5 million for city projects. When we looked at what we would come to you asking for, we really did this with a long-term view. And so one of the items is to add $2 million to the stabilization fund. We will also be asking at some point, although it's not before you tonight, to appropriate $2 million of our free cash for the math curriculum for the school department. We are looking at voice over IP technology and I believe a roof project over at NPS. Concurrently this evening, we have a few items in front of PS&T. One is for PFAS-free gear for our firefighters. When the decision is made to actually move forward with a vendor, our ladder truck, some security upgrades, some traffic calming, and some fleet money for fleet replacement. This has all been done with a long-term view. The items that we otherwise would have bonded, we are asking to use this free cash money so that we can avoid debt service costs over the next several years so that we can do everything we can to help grow, whether it's the NPS budget or the budget in our different departments. This $2 million that we are looking to put toward the stabilization fund, the purpose of this is to extend the life of the stabilization fund. We have had meetings with the school department. We have several meetings set up over the next month where we're going to talk about the long-term view. But at this point, what we would like to do is ask you to appropriate $2 million of our free cash that was declared back in September toward the NPS stabilization fund, with the intent that this would be more or less tacked on at the end of the 5-year period so that we're really extending the life of the fund.
Thank you, Ms. Lemieux. Appreciate it. Any committee members have any questions? Councilor Baker.
Thank you. Earlier in the evening, we heard about the importance of planning ahead for the stabilization fund gap. You know, the difference between what you're going to have coming up. This amount of funding is not reflected in the data you gave us earlier, as I understand it, right? That was before, you were talking about having to plan for the long term in terms of your expenditures, but was this free cash anticipated as part of that, or is this a new money, so to speak?
Mr. Bresky, when you were talking about the gap in the funding cliff down the road, were you factoring in this $2 million transfer that is on the docket tonight, or were you?
Yes, so this 2 million transfer, we've known about concretely for, I don't know what, I guess a month or two maybe. We were certainly well aware that there would be excess free cash at the end of the year based on the way the city budgets interest income. You know, I wouldn't be surprised at the end of next year if there's excess free cash for the same reason. So, you know, it's been out there. It is contemplated now that the $2 million, which we're happy to get, that's in our plans. We still have a long way to go, though. The gap far exceeds what we're talking about here.
Yeah, but it strikes me as a positive step in that direction. So
it absolutely is.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilor Oliver.
Great. So I just want to make sure I heard that right. So the 2 million that we're talking about here is included in the projections and it's known.
Yes, we have that included in our long-term projections now from the moment the city told us that we would receive $2 million in the Ed Stabilization Fund from free cash.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. And then Ms. Lemieux, I'm curious how you arrived at the figure of 2 million. Was that was that reverse engineered, or was it kind of engineered from the, hey, we have this free cash and here's how we need to divvy it up? And I'm just curious what the process there was. Why not, for example, 3 million versus 1 million versus 1.5? I'm curious why you landed on 2.
Thank you, Counselor. So as I said, we feel comfortable appropriating 10 million of our free cash at this point in time. And so we looked at the items that we would otherwise be bonding this year, which is the fleet, perhaps the PFAS equipment, the ladder truck for the fire department. And so one of the goals that we looked at to accomplish with this $10 million in total that we have before you over this next month or so is to minimize what we have to bond for debt service for the next several years. That will give us flexibility in our operating budget. And so that will free up money that otherwise was in my debt service schedule. So part of it was that. Part of it was we know that the superintendent wants to move forward with the math curriculum, even though the schools have not, I don't believe, and I can't see the people in the room very well. So I don't know if our superintendent is nodding her head in agreement with me or not. But as far as I know, we have not yet settled on whatever the math curriculum is going to be. However, we want to make sure that the school department is confident that whatever it is that they choose, that they will be able to move forward with that. So we have identified 2 million of the free cash for the math curriculum. And then, as I said, there were a few other things. So voice over IP for the 2 high schools, a technology that as we understand it, is very much needed at our 2 high schools. And then, as I said, I believe one roof project. But the whole goal is to make sure that we're taking these one-time dollars and stretching them as far as we can. And so our intent is to add to the life of the stabilization fund to make sure that we have funds available for the schools when they are ready to move forward with the math curriculum, and to make sure that we are taking different projects off the table that we otherwise would have had to bond over the next 10, 15, or 20 years and free up those operating dollars so that we'll have money to put toward whatever our needed expenses are over the next several years.
Thank you, and I believe Dr. Nolan was nodding, at least on the math,
Yes, I am nodding, Maureen.
Okay, good.
to reassure you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing other hands at the moment, so judging by the eyebrow, I believe Counselor Oliver wants to move approval.
I would love to move approval on this item. Thank you,
Counselor
Chair.
Oliver has moved approval of the item. Any discussion on that motion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? 6-0. Thank you very much, everyone. Last item of the evening. Item 412-24, this is authorization to appropriate and expend $338,119 for McKinney-Vento homeless student transportation. Ms. Lemieux, do you want to, I don't think there's anyone who hasn't been through this, but if there's anyone who's not familiar with McKinney-Vento funding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really a housekeeping item. The state, for whatever reason, reimburses the city for the cost that we incur for transporting, I will call them homeless students because that's how they refer to it, but these are kids who either are living in Newton and I think are not living in Newton, but come to Newton schools or vice versa. We transport the kids, we receive a reimbursement from the state. For some reason, the state insists on sending the reimbursement to the city's general fund. We receive it in the course of any given fiscal year. As soon as free cash, it drops to free cash. As soon as free cash is declared, we then come to you and ask to be able to transfer those funds to the school department. So it's really a housekeeping measure.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lemieux. Counselor Oliver?
No questions, but when the time is correct, and it might be right now, I would move approval on this item as well.
Counselor Oliver has moved approval. Any discussion on that motion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Fantastic. That is our final evening of the night. I believe we will meet again in a couple of weeks. Counselor Baker, do you want to announce pizza? Pizza's up here. Thank you very much. With that, I believe we will adjourn. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.